They say perfection doesn't exist, but that's not quite true. We celebrate the precious wildlife found in our frozen wildernesses. This is the green planet.
Join me in the celebration of our planet's greatest national parks and wilderness.
Does the Hundredth Wave exist?
The president is a good man. Between you and me, I worry about some of the people with whom he surrounds himself.
Superheroes cannot be allowed to exist.
So what's our plan?
If you are killed, what message do you leave behind to the Russian people?
Oh, come on, Daniel. No way. It's like you're making a movie for the case of my death.
You don't know what hard is. You just got lucky.
I'm also good.
I was broken, Doug.
And we're back. How many children are you friends with?
There was a school.
Joe Manganiello? No one's gonna believe that he could play me. He's not big enough.
You're going on the trip now. It's going to be rough. If you look, you will die.
Shh, one moment. I do love this part.
That's the real magic of the movies, and don't let anybody tell you different.
Want to speak to Oprah Winfrey. Has she reached out?
So this is our product portfolio as of today. So what we're going to be talking about through the course of this session. As I said, we've got the Raptor X and the Komodo X, as well as the Komodo here today. So the idea is this is a product ecosystem. So these are cameras that are designed to work together. So really they tier quite nicely. So if the Raptor XL is your A camera, then the Raptor X is the perfect B camera. Vice versa, if this is your A camera, Komodo X is a nice B camera. They all shoot to the same image codec, same R3D file we'll talk about later. They all control over IP. They all have the same exposure tools, the same menu. These are systems that are designed to work together. So even if you're coming in at kind of the entry point in terms of Komodo, at the lower end in terms of specifications, but also in terms of price point, everything you learn on the Komodo, you can just as easily apply to the Raptor XL. So you can learn RED on a $5,000 system, and know with confidence that you'll be able to operate a $40,000 system. It's quite a nice ecosystem in that sense. Also, they are now all global shutter sensors. So with the launch of the Raptor XLX at the start of the year, full lineup is now global shutter. So we'll start by looking quickly at Komodo and Komodo X, just in terms of chronologically as the entry point cameras. So in terms of rolling shutter and global shutter, hopefully these are terms that everyone is familiar with. So prior to Komodo, and indeed for most digital sensors, they all use rolling shutter traditionally. Hopefully, as I say, everyone's familiar. Just to summarize, rolling shutter is where the sensor is scanned top to bottom. The photo sites are scanned in rows from top to the bottom of the sensor. Obviously, this is slowed down for illustrative purposes. In reality, it happens a lot faster than this. But still, it can lead to unwanted image artifacts. So anything that happens quicker than it takes to scan the sensor, so flash bulbs, spinning blades, whip pans, that sort of stuff, you'll see unwanted image artifacts. So global shutter, and in the case of Komodo, RED's first global shutter sensor, basically eradicates those artifacts. So every photo site is scanned simultaneously, thereby removing any shutter artifacts. Flash bulb, correct, blades will hit true to life. A nice way of thinking about this is the human eye is global. The human eye doesn't scan like top to bottom, it receives light at the back of the eye simultaneously. Traditionally speaking, with global shutter sensors prior to Komodo, a big kind of detriment to them was that you would usually have to sacrifice dynamic range in order to have a global shutter sensor. So Komodo, big kind of technology advancement, we are still able to offer 16 stops of dynamic range and give users a global shutter. So big leap forward at the time. As I said, this now applies across the full camera range. Some visual examples, comparing rolling and global. Guitar strings being a nice easy one. See there with fast moving guitar strings, the wobble versus true to life, straight imagery that you get out of global shutter. And then probably the one that everyone's familiar with is flash bulbs. We're used to seeing this by now. Kind of flicker that you get with flash bulbs. Global, you get on, you get off. Okay, so that made Komodo very popular as a kind of action camera, crash camera for Hollywood. So the initial specification or the initial request for Komodo came from studios like Marvel, Netflix, like quite action-oriented productions, who essentially wanted a cinema camera that they could use as a crash cam. Their kind of request to RED was, can you make a cinema quality camera that is at a low enough price point and a low enough physical size that we can use it as a crash camera? So that was the initial brief for Komodo, which is why obviously a lot of these productions, for some of the early examples of Komodo set, are quite action orientated. I think the first one they went out on with Matrix Resurrections. That was while it was still in beta, and they did manage to blow one up, melt the camera housing. They were still able to stop recording, pull the card, use the footage in the final film. Obviously, everyone who uses Komodo is using it as a crash camera. So a big thing with Komodo, because of that price point, it very quickly became adopted by a lot of users across the market. So not just high-end cinema, but sort of prosumer, commercial, television became very popular. Also, global shutter became really important working in virtual production. So Komodo has really kind of proliferated that market as well. I have a clip here from Red Notice. So again, this ties into kind of Red's ethos, maybe not since the Red-1, but after the Red-1, Red was all about making the body size, the smaller form factor, that cube-like camera size that we're all quite familiar with today. Komodo is sort of the next evolution of that. It allowed filmmakers to capture shots that they previously wouldn't have been able to. But Red Notice is one of the first examples of people actually attaching a Komodo to racing drones or FPV drones. So they were able to get unique shots like this.
You're not a cop.
Right, I'm not.
Okay, so that's, yeah, a nice example of a shot that might not have been possible, or wouldn't have been possible on a cinema camera prior to Komodo. Again, I realize that's quite an action-orientated example, but in general, smaller bodies doesn't have to be action-orientated. A lot of cinematographers, Henry Graham, talk about using smaller cameras to be able to be a lot more intimate with actors on set, improvise a lot faster on set. In general, so when you're on set, time is money. It allows you to be a lot more flexible working with smaller camera bodies. So because Komodo quickly became Red's most popular camera, being used for all sorts of productions, like I said, not just that crash camera, Red quickly saw that was the case. So a camera that was designed to be a crash camera obviously had certain concessions were made to get it as small and as cheap as possible. So things like audio, frame rates, they weren't quite as high on the priority list, whereas they are for people who use it as their day-to-day camera. So that was why the Komodo X was created to cater to that audience. So people who are using the Komodo as their A camera, the Komodo X was kind of designed to meet their needs. So double the frame rates, better low light performance, while still offering the same 6K Super 35 global shutter sensor. And again, faster media to handle those data rates, better audio, better preamps. In general, slightly more ergonomic design, micro V-locks instead of BB batteries, that sort of thing. Those are the key differences between Komodo and Komodo X. But yeah, these are some of the productions that have used Raptor. We find a lot of filmmakers have been using Red for a long time in their careers, like people like David Fincher have been shooting on Red since the Red-1, Steven Soderbergh, James Gunn is a new one, Zack Snyder. Yes, pretty regular filmmakers here. Okay, so in terms of the Raptor X and the XLX, the idea here is they both feature exactly the same camera sensor. So in terms of image performance, in terms of data, frame rates, they're going to be the same. They're designed to be an A/B camera solution. So the body is a purely technical decision based around how you like to work on set. You want kind of an all-in-one studio camera that has multiple monitoring paths, it's high voltage, it has the internal NDs, multiple power ports to run loads of accessories, or do you want the kind of smaller, more modular system that you can strip down or build up, depending on how you like to operate? That's kind of the decision between the two camera bodies. Obviously, you can see with the Raptor X we have here today, we have built it up a little bit. So again, there are plenty of accessories out there that allow you to bring it up to kind of cinema-looking build, but you can still strip it right down to the body, have a monitor, battery, lens, good to go. In terms of the sensor itself, we refer to the Raptor sensor as kind of a multi-format sensor. What we mean by that is if you shoot using the full sensor, so 8K DV, that gives you large format lens coverage. And if you crop the sensor down to 6K, that gives you Super 35 sensor coverage. So can you drop it down to 6K just so we can see the difference? Great. Yeah, so essentially as you lower the resolution with a RED camera, crop the sensor physically. So that's consistent across all cameras. So if you're shooting to our RAW codec, you lower the resolution, we'll crop the sensor. And indeed, if you go all the way down to 3K, that could give you Super 60 sensor coverage. Yeah, we don't do any kind of like pixel bin or anything like that. So it's always the raw sensor data. These cameras do let you shoot ProRes as well. If you are shooting like a quad 4 ProRes, then it will just downsample internally. But if you're shooting raw, physically cropping sensor. Okay, these are some fairly dry technical specifications. I'll break these down in a little more detail. You're looking at a 5 micron photosite size, that low light performance, 17 stops of measurable dynamic range, high frame rates up to 120 frames per second in 8K, max exposure time at a sixth of a second, especially handy if you're doing things like time lapses. Cameras do have a dedicated time lapse mode as well. We have anamorphic D-squeeze options in 8K, 7K, and 6K, so for large format 35 lenses. In camera, and then also Komodo all the way through to Raptor XL have phase detection autofocus built into the sensor. See, this isn't something that you're going to be using at the high end. Sort of handheld operators, people shooting it as their day-to-day camera, the focus can be quite handy using RF lenses or BF lenses. Okay, so this is the biggest thing with the V-Raptor X sensor. So as I said earlier, typically global shutter sensors, you have to sacrifice some dynamic range. But with the global shutter V-Raptor X, which was the world's first large format global shutter sensor, we were still able to match dynamic range from the previous generation of V-Raptor, which used a rolling shutter. We were still able to offer filmmakers 17 stops dynamic range whilst providing that global shutter. So this is a very, very big leap forward in terms of technology. Obviously, I'm not an engineer. I'm sure they work very, very hard on this. So I realize this showing a Xyla chart is quite a boring way to kind of demonstrate dynamic range. We have quite a nice shot here from an underwater cinematographer that kind of gives you an idea of how you can use that dynamic range. But yeah, this demonstrates kind of what that dynamic range looks like when you kind of bring the file into post. So this particular clip was shot in camera at 1600 ISO, and then it's been manipulated in post. So with RED, ISO is metadata, as we'll talk about later. So you have access to ISO in post-production in the same way you do in camera. So this was shot at 1600, and then in post-production, we brought it down by 5 stops and then lifted it by 3 stops. So ISO 50, 12, 800. Hopefully that will make sense. This is another unique thing to the V-Raptor sensor. So a big change with the Raptor is that the sensor is now heated. So it has a thermoelectric cooler built onto the sensor to directly manage the sensor temperature. What that means is it gives you a lot more consistent noise profile. Not sure how well that will come across on this screen. This is comparing V-Raptor sensor to an older legacy sensor from RED. Hopefully we can see the noise profile or the grain structure a lot more randomized on Raptor, whereas previously it had that slightly more video-y fixed pattern noise profile. So this is a big thing for filmmakers working at the high end. Obviously, whenever you talk about digital cameras, if you talk about noise, people hate it. If you talk about grain, people love it. It's kind of one of those terminologies that people get used quite a lot. And what that also means with the Raptor is gives you kind of best-in-class low-light performance. So the Raptor really excels in low light, so minimal light. This is a clip that we put together for camera image to demonstrate that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so as David said, this was kind of a technical demonstration. This was lit by that single flame, so the match and the candle. The candle is just an off-the-shelf candle. There's no like triple wick or anything like that. It's just a single wick candle. used to light that. Obviously, there is a slight edge light that comes in at the end. See that blue light? So I'll just play that back one more time. If you keep an eye on kind of the lower left corner of the frame, so it's the kind of the hand appear in shot. Hopefully a really good demonstration how good the camera is in the light. Okay, and again, in post-production, you have access to the ISO camera, so we have the raw shot for that clip, adjusting that. Okay, we won't dwell on extended highlights today. This might be something for another session in the future. We just wanted to make you aware of it. That this is a feature that's also specific to the Raptor X system. So this essentially gives you 3 extra stops to your highlights. So if you do find that the 17 stops of the sensor aren't enough, you have some specular highlights, maybe the sun, something like that, flame, shot, you want to retain that information, that's where you turn on this feature. Okay. So if you do have any questions on extended highlights, we'd be happy to go through it. We have the Raptor X here, show you how it works in post-production. But yeah, we'll gloss over this today. Another feature that's unique to the Raptor X, that I know David's also planning to explore in a future session, is Phantom Track, which is designed to work in virtual production environments. So where you have LED volumes that can flicker very quickly between 2 images. Now with the camera, because it can shoot high speed and also has a global shutter, we can capture both those images simultaneously, output them via different monitoring paths, and also capture them in 2 separate files. It's quite a common, or becoming a more common workflow in virtual production. So this is a unique feature in the Raptor X. Again, if you have more questions on this, I have to go through it in detail. Really, the best demonstration of it is when you see it in person. High frame rates. Again, this is something that's quite unique to RED. This has been, I think, well, when the initial rolling shutter V-Raptor launched about 3 years ago, these specifications are still kind of unmatched when it comes to cinema cameras. So, like I said earlier, 8K, 120 frames per second maximum. And then, as we know, when you change resolution, you're cropping the sensor, you're reducing the amount of data you're capturing, and therefore your frame rates can go up. So, you shoot 2:4:1 in 8K, that gives you a maximum of 150, all the way down to 600 frames per second in 2K 2:4:1. Obviously, when if you are shooting 2K, you're using a tiny section of the sensor, so you need to give it a lot of light. That's something to consider. And there's a little party trick the camera also does, an 8:1 aspect ratio that will let you shoot at 1,000 frames per second. So probably the higher frame rates, less common in kind of narrative film, but for things like commercial work, sports, that sort of stuff, these are kind of exceptional in that regard. And again, if you want to go fast, obviously then you're looking to bring phantoms onto set. Often phantoms cost a lot for their rental. Usually they come with their own operator, and they're not giving you a raw 16-bit codec like you're getting out of the RED. Okay, ND. So as I said earlier, we have an internal ND system in the V-Raptor XL, which is a bigger camera, it can handle that. Essentially, all that's happening is you're swapping between a clear filter and an electronic ND filter. So our ND system is electronic. So what that means is it's a liquid crystal you apply a voltage to, and it lets more or less light in. The nice thing with that system is it means you can be very granular. So we can adjust that ND in quarter, third, or full stop increments. You have very precise control over the ND. So it offers between 2 and 7 stops, or 0.6 to 2.1 neutral density. In terms of how that looks, this is with the XL. So this is clear. See the ND cartridge comes in. And now we're just working with the electronic ND. So in this case, this is full stop increments. But a great deal of effort has gone into matching the ND to the camera sensor. So that's very minimal color shift, especially as you kind of get higher in that ND range. You see very minimal color shift across that range of ND. The idea with the granular control is you can treat it as another exposure. So rather than having to rely on iris or shutter, which might affect depth of field, motion cadence, lean on the ND to make very subtle adjustments to the exposure of your shot. So that's how it works in the XL. I'm going to pull the cartridge out of that camera. Just pull it out, hold it up. I think that's the clear one, but if you just take it out, just so they can see it. Yeah, so Greg's got the clear filter there. So that's basically just going in behind the lens in the PL mount. So whilst the XL, you can change between them internally with the mount option, you do have to physically swap between clear and ND. But once the ND is in, you have full electronic control over it, as you would in the MSL. Okay. Yes. That's right. Yes. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, that is an RF to PL mount, basically. Okay, as I mentioned at the top of this, these are all designed to work. They're all designed to be controlled over IP. So whether that's over Ethernet, Wi-Fi, so on location, in studios, they all speak the same command language. That SDK, or the RED command protocol as we call it, is publicly available as well, so people can write their own interfaces with the camera if they see fit. But the best implementation of that is the RED Control Pro app. So RED Control is for free on iOS and Android. Download that off the App Store and interface directly with any of these cameras. And then we also have a Pro version, which has a one-time purchase fee that will run on iPad, Mac OS. The main difference between these two apps is this is designed to give you multi-camera control. So if you're on a shoot where you have more than one RED, free camera shoot, you can control them all through one application. So yeah, in terms of giving yourself camera control wirelessly, in this case, we're connected to the same network that the camera is connected to, so therefore the app knows to find the camera. But vice versa, if you're on set without any kind of established networks, the camera can also generate its own network. So you connect your devices to the camera and then communicate that way. And again, this is in terms of latency, that'll depend on the network speed, basically. The camera will also provide you kind of a compressed motion JPEG, just so you do have an image available in the app. You can also access this separately through a browser as well. So the camera, if you want, will generate its own HTML web page. In terms of the best kind of user controllable interface, RED Control is brilliant. As camera companion apps go, I think it's fair to say RED Control is kind of untouchable, I think. All right, we're very quickly, just before we have a break, we'll just talk very briefly about resolution and RED code. They're two quite unique aspects of the RED ecosystem. So resolution, obviously we could talk all day about kind of the benefits of high resolution image making. This is the key one, super sampling, or as it's sometimes known, downsampling. So shooting at a higher resolution than your final deliverable, we produce that. So in this example, we have basically 4K deliverable, and then what that looks like when captured at 8K, 4K, 2K. So hopefully you kind of get an idea of the differences in terms of upsampling from 2K, shooting 4K for 4K, and then downsampling 8K to 4K. See, 8K, you're capturing 4 times the information of 4K. Downsample from 8K to 4K, there's significant benefits to be had, especially in terms of the noise characteristics, but also that's kind of a big benefit when we're talking about that low light performance. That downsample is also quite. Okay, another key feature of the RED RAW codec is that it is a 16-bit codec. So in terms of the bit depth, the color. This is quite an extreme comparison between 16-bit and 8-bit, just to demonstrate the differences. Hopefully you can all see, but obviously on the 8-bit image, where you have a very gradual transition across quite a specific tone of color, like the sky, the obvious example. On 8-bit, you'll start to see banding in that information. Whereas with a 16-bit color profile, you have that much more gradual, nuanced transition across tones of color. And then the same way as 8K is 4 times the information as 4K, 16-bit isn't just double 8-bit, it is exponentially more information. So when we're talking about 16-bit profiles, you're looking at 280 trillion possible tones of color that the sensor is able to capture within that kind of log profile, within that color space, I should say, in comparison to around 1 billion for a 10-bit codec. So it's exponentially more color information we're able to capture in that R3D file. So the kind of next step to that R3D or RED code, obviously, historically speaking, RED has always made 4K or higher sensors in terms of resolution. Now the two Komodos 6K and the Raptors are 8K. So quite a common misconception perhaps is that that's going to generate crazy amounts of data. So what's unique to RED in terms of the RED code compression, we have a visually lossless compression algorithm that's applied to the image, and we give users control of how much compression they want to apply to the R3D. So the top end, or in terms of like minimal compression that you're applying, you're looking at HQ and MQ. To give you a comparison that might make it easier to understand, that's the recording time of a quad 4 ProRes file. We also offer another level of compression that gives you even longer record times. Again, this is just to remind you that we're comparing here 8K 16-bit against 4K 10-bit. And obviously the RED file is raw, so you have access to all the metadata, which we'll talk about later. And then fine, you might not be using a quad 4 XQ file. We do also have a level of compression that gives you even more recording time than a standard quad 4 ProRes. So hopefully that helps dissuade any fear that you are capturing lots of data. At this point, you can shoot an 8K 16-bit raw file and actually have longer record times than shooting 10-bit quad 4 ProRes file in 4K. You can probably guess what HQ, MQ, LQ, ELQ stands for. If anyone wants to shout it out. Yeah, perfect. Not a trick question. So it's always a bit uncomfortable, these terminologies. I don't necessarily like that we went down that route. So prior to Komodo, it was expressed just as a ratio in camera, so 4:1, 6:1, 8:1, 10:1. But we found that that often caused a lot of questions from customers. They were always asking, which red code compression ratio should I be at for this shot, this shot? So the decision was made to simplify it with Komodo. So, but I also understand if you've just spent 40,000 euros on a cinema camera, your first thought isn't going to be, I'll put it in low quality mode. So I understand people are a little bit cautious when it comes to these terms. So a better way of thinking about it is complexity. So high complexity, medium complexity, low complexity. So it's dependent on the scene you are trying to capture, essentially. Realistically, the only people who should be using HQ is if you're doing really high budget, big cinema productions where you know there's going to be loads of visual effects and you need to absolutely maximize the information you're working with. Most feature films, high-end television, documentaries will shoot around MQ. I think Netflix stipulate MQ when working with these systems. But again, for kind of streaming, long-form television, LQ is perfectly fine. And then ELQ, I know plenty of people who never actually leave ELQ. They shoot that quite comfortably. But again, for things like interviews where you know you're going to be recording for maybe 3-4 hours, ELQ is fine. So like I said, in terms of the complexity of the image, you need to think about how much detail is in the frame. If you're shooting, say, a forest where everything is in focus, there's loads of movement, loads of high detail, maybe then you want to stay around that MQ mark. But if you're shooting someone sat down, subject, soft focus, everything is out of focus in the background, then LQ, ELQ is going to be more than enough. Especially if you know your deliverable is going on something like Vimeo or YouTube, the compression at the back end is going to slaughter anything that's happening in camera anyway. Yeah, so if you know you're going to be pulling stills from the image file, which is another workflow that's quite popular with RED, then maybe HQ, MQ, if you know it's going on massive billboards, advertising campaigns, that sort of thing. But for video content, most. The best thing I can suggest with this is test. Right? That's the easiest way to check. A lot of the time we have, producers might push back on what kind of compression level you want to shoot at. Quite often, if you were to send someone a clip shot in HQ, MQ, LQ, ELQ, and they viewed it in 4K on a 4K monitor, they probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's pretty subtle. So the key thing when we're talking about resolution and red code, so in terms of the combination of resolution and compression, where possible with a RED, you always want to be shooting using the full sensor. So there are creative times where that might not be the case. So we talked about some of them earlier. So frame rates, for example, lens choices might dictate that you end up using less of a sensor. But if you're trying to save data, right, if data is a concern, right, if you are getting pushback from production in terms of how much data you're capturing, increase the compression, don't lower the resolution. It's another misconception people have about RED. So to demonstrate that, we have, this is just a lens chart that was shot at 8K ELQ, so our highest level of compression. Gives you around 100 megabytes a second of data, but not much data. And then this is comparing it to 4K HQ. So this is now our lowest level of compression. But obviously, we're capturing 4 times less the resolution. So hopefully this demonstrates that at a very similar data rate, both around 100 megabytes a second, we're able to capture a lot more information by just keeping it at 8K, increasing the compression. So that's the key takeaway from today. If that's all you take with you, if you're using a RED, shoot using the full sensor. If people say, oh, it's too much data, then fine, just increase the compression. That will give you a better image than lowering your resolution. Okay? Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. yeah, I think anytime I've shot interviews on Reds, it's always ELQ because you know you can just roll for hours without worrying about having to cut. Another key thing here that I didn't mention at the start is that, again, all the cameras shoot to the same R3D file. They also use exactly the same image processing pipeline. So whether you're using the Komodo or the Raptor, you're shooting to the same color log space. You're processing that image the same way in camera as you are in post. So you always have the same starting point when you're working with Red. Again, when you're working with multiple cameras on set, that product ecosystem is designed for them all to work together. Good start. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll just quickly walk you through the image pipeline, like I say, for Red cameras. So when I say image processing pipeline, we refer to it as IPP2. So we've been using this processing pipeline for about, correct me if I'm wrong, Volkan, but I think about 8 years, around 8 years now. So again, the nice thing with the R3D file is as we improve our color science, you can actually backdate that to footage that was shot on earlier Red cameras. It all works with the same R3D. So IPP2 was designed to give a uniform starting point on the current lineup of Red cameras. So always working in the same pipeline, regardless of which system it is. Okay, so this is the pipeline in its most simple form. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but in terms of taking you from analog signal, light, hitting the sensor, converting it to a digital signal, and then developing that to our wide color space and log curve. And then finally, how do you want to view that image? What output look do you want to apply on set or in post-production? This design is designed to give you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you work. So first off, we'll start at the end. We have the controls that affect the output look. Thank you, Volkan. So things like tone mapping, highlight roll-off, color space, output gamma. So these are what we call the technical output transforms. Purely just a technical decision. How do you want to view the image, essentially? So how that looks visually, there's the log, and there's a standard, in this case, a standard Rec 709 output transform. Right. Taking from our log space to standard Rec 709 space. Okay, so hopefully everyone's with me so far. Nothing too crazy. Okay, so just to explain some of those output transforms or technical transforms. In terms of the color space, the idea here is that our native color space, in this case, red, wide gamut, is basically designed so it can capture all the colors that the sensor can see are captured within that color space. The reason it's much bigger, obviously, you have this graph here in terms of human vision, but also your standard kind of output transforms. So Rec 709, 2020, DCI-P3, they all fall comfortably within that color space. The idea was when we change to this big color space, it's future-proofing your workflows. It's designed for both SDR and HDR workflows. So you're able to kind of grade accordingly to which output you want to work in. In terms of IPP2, again, another benefit of that wide color space is it helps you to capture colors that were previously referred to as out of gamut colors. So previously, if the sensor was trying to display a color that didn't fall within that gamut, you would get these kind of untrue to life kind of weird gamma effects. So this just shows you how new color science cleans those up, gives you the colors as they are seen. Same applies to chromatic aberrations on lights, and then also kind of tricky to capture colors historically, things like magenta, they all fall within that color space, so you'll capture them accurately. This is also worth noting, we're starting to see cinema cameras being used in broadcast a lot more for this reason. They can capture live events to a much higher quality traditional kind of live broadcast. Okay, another facet of the output transform that we give users control over is the highlight roll-off. So whether you want to reach clipping very quickly, quite a linear way, or whether you want a smoother approach to clipping. So again, this often means that whilst it may look like it's clipped, you still have the information there, and you can decide how quickly you approach that clipping point. In terms of retaining information in those highlights, this is something you have control over in camera. So just probably won't see it too well on this monitor. So at the moment, we've got hard highlight roll-off, very soft, and then we also have control over contrast of the image, so low contrast to high contrast. These are kind of controls that are built in to that output transform. Again, I've stressed everything in this image control section so far. This is all metadata. We're not baking it into the image. You have control over this in camera. and in post-production. So the same way you work with the camera on set is exactly the same thing you do in post-production. You always have the same pipeline. The next section to this that also applies to the output look are your creative controls. So the idea here is we separated the creative controls from the technical. You have that clear distinction. So creative controls in camera are your CDLs, so your color decision lists, and your LUTs, 3D LUTs. So again, the camera does come with some LUTs preloaded, but if you're happy making your own LUTs, then load them onto the camera yourself. Again, if I... That's a bleach bypass LUT, essentially. It's just a creative control. It's independent from that output transfer. In terms of how that looks visually now, in terms of the pipeline, you have your log, your X709, and your creative. Right. Okay, log, output, creative control. Cool. Okay, and as I said, because this is a raw codec, the R3D, we also have control over our Kelvin, tint, ISO, and exposure adjust. So these image controls directly affect the log image now. So these happen before that output transfer. So if I go to my log, so this is the log space. So when you're shooting R3D, you're always capturing to this log space, yeah? So when I say you have control over the output transform, that just means what do you want to see on set? Just telling the camera whether to show me log or show me it with an output transform. We have independent control on the image outputs. So if you want to give the director a send log to that. Yeah, send log to SDI. Send it. But yeah, the idea is you have independent control over the monitoring bands. So send one monitor X709, one monitor log, depending on what's needed. Set. And as this is, so as this is raw, we have control over Kelvin, ISO in post-production, which I'll show you in a minute. So in terms of ISO in camera, shoot at 800 on the day, and then in post-production, change the ISO. So all that is a metadata adjustment. And then again, in terms of all those image controls that we just talked about, you have control over all of them in camera. You also have control over them in post. So you can shoot a scene on the day where maybe the context might change in the edit. Maybe the scene before and after dictate that actually, the dancer's in a slightly different headspace. You want to cool off the colors, change the brightness, that sort of stuff. You have access to control that you have in camera. Okay, so those are the image controls that are raw. Like I say, you have access to them in camera and in post. So, but really, all this is just to kind of make you realize that the only things that properly matter are the things we always work with, which is light. So this is what's critical. This is what's baked into the image. So the R3D file is just a record of the light that hit the sensor at the time you hit record. Everything else is saved as a separate metadata file. You can change it afterwards. So the things that affect light have been the same for a very long time. So your lens choices, focus, iris, zoom, lens characteristics, your shutter speed, your filter, your resolution, your compression, those are things that you're baking in. Everything else is metadata. But even if you're not too comfortable with what's happening here, the priority is the light. So this kind of informs, since the RED-1, it's been kind of RED's ethos, the idea of maximizing your digital negative. So giving your digital negative as much information as you can, so you have the most flexibility throughout the production. This goes back to kind of consistent digital, also film. So a nice example we like to use is I Love Lucy. If anyone's seen this show, I've not seen I Love Lucy. It's my American colleagues talk about it a lot. I've not personally seen it, but essentially it was broadcast in the 50s initially in America. It went out on terrestrial television. This is kind of an approximation of what it looked like at the time on TV. So they knew this is what it was going to look like at the end. They still chose to shoot it all on 35mm film. So at the time, 35mm film was the best medium they had available to themselves, and they still chose to shoot this way, even though they knew it was going to look like this in the 50s. But by choosing to shoot at the best quality medium they had available, it meant that every decade, as home entertainment systems improved, they were always able to meet new deliverable standards. They kind of completely future-proofed their workflow by maximizing their negative. The same process when working with RED. So a RED example, District 9, which was shot actually on the RED-1 back in 2009. The initial deliverable for that was just a HD SDR. That was what we needed at the time. Because they shot RED and they had all the raw information, they were able in 2020 to go back, do a 4K HDR Blu-ray release. They had the R3D file, which was just a record of the light. They were able to go back in, apply all of RED's latest color science, and do a Blu-ray 4K release. Okay, so that's kind of the idea with focusing on the sensor level data, focus on the light, give yourself as much information to work with most. Yeah, exactly. Maybe another example that everyone's more familiar with is Friends. Like Friends also did the same thing as I Love Lucy. I think they sold to Netflix something like 200 million, like decades after they shot it. You're future-proofing your work in this way. Okay, so as I said, in terms of it working the same way in post-production, like this is basically, just going to bring up that slide again. Yeah, so same way in post as it is in camera. So if I turn these off. So we brought the R3D file into Resolve, and we're just working off the log color space again. Okay. So if I open up the project settings, camera raw. Well, see this. Okay. Yeah, we basically set our project settings to IPP2. We set the color space and the log curve the same as we're capturing in camera. So essentially that means every R3D we bring into our project will be within that IPP2 color space. Again, this is another maybe misconception people have about the R3D, is that you have to create proxies. That's no longer the case. GPU now is so good. Like this is you could almost argue this is a prosumer MacBook. It has an M1 chip in it. I can play back 8K footage on it. So you know, gone are the days where you need to be creating proxy files for your raw. You can just edit the R3D like it's any other file. So we have, in this case, the log space. If I want to, I can access the controls that do affect the log. So things like ISO. If I have access to the full ISO range in post-production, as I did in camera, in this case, I'll go back to project, set it back to the shot at the time. And then to go from the log, I can turn on my output transform. So to show you what this is doing, I have my output transform saved as LUTs. So basically, every type of output transform you have available in camera, you can use as a LUT in Resolve. So if you want to use, say, like a low contrast output transform, you have that option. But in this case, we were shooting medium contrast, very soft. And then again, as we did in camera, as long as the output transform is at the end of your node tree, everything you change in terms of your CDLs, your contrast curve, as long as you have your output transform at the end, you can be confident you're always working off the wide color space, always working, rather than making changes within that compressed Rexo node space. That makes sense. And then again, I have, in this case, a separate node as a LUT. So that's hopefully a very simple way of showing the same way the pipeline works in camera is exactly the same way you treat it most. Okay. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a Resolve master or anything like that. I'm not a colorist. In terms of working with this file in Resolve, in Premiere, in Final Cut, they all accept the R3D natively. So yeah, definitely don't be intimidated by working with a raw file software. Yeah, these days, essentially the debed, the decompression has been moved on the GPU. So as long as your GPU is relatively up to date, I can say this is a prosumer laptop, you can play back 8K footage. So this is kind of a typical file structure within the RDC clip. So the R3D file will actually be broken down into 4 gig chunks. So this is related to file formatting, but also has the benefits of making the file easy to work with. So when you bring this into your Resolve, your Final Cut, your Premiere, you'll know to see it in full clip, but it's captured in 4 gig chunks. The nice thing there is, like, in terms of data recovery as well, maybe you're recording for an hour, you lose power to the camera, it should be the only chunk will be affected, the last one should still be able to cover. It has that benefit as well. But here, the R3D itself is just, like I said, a record of the light that you captured at the time of recording. The RMD folder here, that's what's storing all those image controls. So yeah, all these image controls are being stored separately in that RMD folder. So that's what makes it a non-destructive process. So when we make changes in post to the ISO or to your white balance or to your output transforms, you're just updating that RMD folder. You're not directly updating the R3D. So it's completely non-destructive mode of capture. Yeah, so anything that affects light, so yeah, shutter rank, iris, the placement of your lights physically in the scene, that's all baked in that R3D file. And the image control defensively. The only exception is that mid-grade point mentioned earlier. So your mid-grade point is shifted by your ISO decision. That's the only thing to be aware of. So shooting at a lower ISO will lower your mid-grade. Shooting at a higher ISO, increase your mid-grade. Yeah. Okay. So that's okay. Perfect. Yeah. So like I said, on Raptor now, the sensor's heated. So it has a thermoelectric cooler that warms it up, cools it down. So it'll operate plus or minus 40 degrees Celsius. So you're not really going to run into any issues. And again, like I said, it gets used North Pole, South Pole, bottom of the ocean, volcanoes. Yeah, like it's solid. It's also a big thing is like the black shade calibration. It now applies for the full operating range of the sensor, so you don't need to be recalibrating when the temperature shifts. Yeah, the camera will always prompt you if it needs a calibration. We have the T and E indicators. So T stands for temperature, E for exposure. If they change color, it's just the camera saying, I need a calibration. But like I say, on the Raptor, it's pretty much that. I normally go through this bit by bit, but just to give you an idea of how all the exposure tools work, we have exposure tools for basically every section of that image pipeline. In terms of what I was saying about exposing for your RAW, we have exposure tools that only work with data. So these tools are completely unaffected by your metadata image controls. So traffic lights are the best example. I don't know if you want to, so you can see on the monitor, the traffic lights will fill up at the bottom or at the top as you let more or less light reach the sensor. Barely, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, at this point we're working with a lot of dynamic range, so it's quite tricky. There you go, yeah, so you can see them turning on at the top. Yeah, I mean, in this case, if they turn on at the top, it's just saying like over 3% of pixels in that channel clicked or under. Yes. That's down to you. Up to you. I think the best way to expose using these is to keep an eye on the traffic lights, and then turn on something like the exposure tool. Turn on the exposure. Turn on the exposure. So obviously the traffic lights don't tell you where in the image you're clipped or underexposed. So then you can use something like the exposure tool just to quickly decide whether it affects your composition. Chances are that, yeah, so here we can see that the candles, flames are a little bit clipped. We've got a little bit of underexposure over here. So then you just need to decide on set whether that matters to your composition. And then, yeah, so Geoscope is probably the most kind of thorough raw exposure tool we have. This is a zonal-based exposure tool. So it turns the whole image grayscale, and then we can essentially turn on, so it breaks it down into 16 stops. You can turn on different colors for each stop that the sensor can see. And again, this is working with raw information. The only thing that's going to affect that is light. You turn on. This is for all RED cameras. So this oh, sorry, I thought you said for rats. You can use it indoors as well. These are just exposed. Think of it as in the same way you have tools to help you focus. These are tools to help you expose. So yeah, the traffic lights are a really powerful way. So in terms of what we were saying earlier about getting as much information onto the digital negative, this is a really quick indicator of whether that digital negative is clipped or exposed. So we have the exposure false color is for the log, and then the video false color is for the output look. So you would only use these controls if you know you're not going to be changing anything like this in post. So if you're just doing a really quick shoot, and if you do want to light for Rec 709, then you do have controls to light for Rec 709. If you want to light for the log, you have controls that let you light for the log. But we normally encourage people like for the RAW, that way you have the most flexibility. Well, I mean, anything you change in the app that affects the camera will be stored in the metadata for the video file. So it's not stored by the control app, but it's stored with the file. Yeah. So you have like every bit of metadata that you can think of, the camera will capture that, store it. If you're using smart lenses like /i or Zeiss extended data, that will also be stored in the metadata files. You'll have like focus distance, all that information is also stored. Yeah, you can hand off the visual effects. Yeah, this is, again, you're not baking this in. This is extended highlights on the Raptor. So this is showing, this part of the image. We can see we're clipped with the sunrise. See from our scopes that we're kind of right at the edge. And then because it was captured with extended highlights, toggle extended highlights on. Yeah. Yeah, as long as it's not fast, you won't see any issues. Actually, I can show you the latest. The previous version. Let me show you. Just bring up. So we have the nice thing now with the extended highlights is we are controlling the blend ourselves. So this is some examples of the latest blend. Yeah, so this is release blend. So back in January, this is the latest blend. So now you can, I think it's fair to say, this looks like pretty normal motion artifact. Again, like this is back when it was first released. This is all beta as well, I should say. Like we're continuously working on the blend, but already you can see it's starting to get a lot better. And this is a really extreme example, like a fight scene backlit by the sun. Like even here, where you've got kind of camera movement, actors movement. And again, this is obviously they're intentionally exposing this wrong to show how it works. Most of the time, you're not going to be using extended highlights or something like this. But this is a very specific test just to show. Oh yes, yeah, I was going to say it's something that Eric Messerschmidt talks about a lot. So Eric, we like to talk about Eric because he won an Oscar shooting on RED. He talks about the concept that the sensor does not dictate the look. The idea that the sensor dictates the look, it's sort of insulting to filmmakers. It's the lens, the lighting, set design, the whole crew that build the look. The camera is the capture device. Yeah, so I think we were talking about this. So I'm guessing most people are aware that at the start of the year, Nikon bought RED. So we're owned by Nikon now. So they've been very clear they're keeping RED. So they're not going to change anything in terms of RED. But the best thing I heard after the acquisition, one of our engineers, was that Nikon's autofocus team is bigger than the whole of RED. So the hardware is there, like we have laser detection autofocus already built into the sensor. So that just means that we can continue to improve on it through software. I think previously, it was like one engineer at RED was working on autofocus and it wasn't even his full week. So now hopefully we have much bigger resources in terms of people power to kind of improve on that. I think we've already added face tracking in camera. That was something that was added this year. Talking about adding object tracking. Yeah, as we kind of improve on it, that will be made available for firmware updates. At the moment, I still kind of look at autofocus as a focus assist. I wouldn't necessarily use it exclusively for the whole shoot, but in terms of tap to focus, go manual from there.